I still check the locks 3 times before bed. Not because I'm afraid of my brothers, they're gone, scattered, broken by the same system they tried to use against me. I check the locks because some lessons don't leave your body. They settle in your fingers, your breath, the way you stand in doorways and hesitate before entering, even when you hold the key. My grandmother taught me to make tamales in this kitchen. She taught me to read under the orange tree in the courtyard. She taught me that inheritance is not possession, it's responsibility. My brothers never learned that lesson. They learned that property is power, that women are temporary, that a house belongs to the name, not the person who loves it. They were wrong. It took me 4 years to prove it. 4 years of silence, of observation, of becoming invisible while they became careless. 4 years of letting them think they'd won, while I prepared the ending they never saw coming. My name is Isabel. I'm 40 years old. And this is the story of how my brothers locked me out of my inheritance, and how I changed the locks, the deed, and their lives. Welcome to Little Bunny Stories. If you're new here, this is where we tell the truth about families that call themselves traditional while they steal from daughters. If you've ever had someone tell you that a house belongs to the family name while they meant the male line, if you've ever been locked out of your own home by the people who should have protected you, subscribe. We have stories for you every week, and we read every comment. Here's my story. I was the only daughter, the middle child, technically, but functionally the only girl in a house of men. My father was distant, traditional, the kind of man who shook his son's hands and patted my head. My mother was absent in the ways that mattered, present in body, but checked out, medicated, surviving a marriage she'd never wanted. She died when I was 12. Overdose, they called it, accidental. I was 16 before I understood it probably wasn't. My brothers were my father's pride. Mateo, the eldest, 45 now, a lawyer who spoke in contracts and thought in loopholes. Carlos, the middle brother, 42, a builder who destroyed as much as he created, who measured worth in square footage and testosterone. Diego, the youngest, 38, who never grew up, who gambled and lost and borrowed and lied, who expected the family to save him because he was the baby, because he was the son, because the world owed him rescue. I was none of those things. I was the daughter. The one who cooked, who cleaned, who sat with my grandmother Rosa while she faded. The one who listened to her stories, who learned her recipes, who read to her when her eyes failed. The one who held her hand at the end, who heard her last words. The house is yours, Mija. The tree, the kitchen, the walls. Don't let them take it. Don't let them turn it into money. I didn't let them, but they tried. Grandma Rosa died when I was 36. Her lawyer called me the day before the reading, a kind man, old, who'd known my family for decades. Isabel, he said, his voice careful. Your grandmother was very specific. She wanted you to know before the others, the house is yours. Entirely. The land, the structure, the contents. Your brothers receive $50,000 each, paid over 10 years. She wanted them to learn patience. I cried. Not for the money, though the house was worth nearly $3 million, the historical value incalculable. I cried because she saw me. Because in a family where I was the afterthought, the maid, the unpaid nurse, she recognized what I'd given, what I'd built, what I'd preserved. The reading was the next day. Mateo came in a suit that cost more than my car. Carlos in work boots, construction dust still on his jeans, performing the working-class authenticity he'd abandoned years ago. Diego last, smelling of cigarettes and desperation, checking his phone for betting odds. The lawyer read the will. Mateo's face went rigid. Carlos laughed, a harsh, disbelieving sound. Diego looked confused, as if waiting for the punchline. This is bullshit, Mateo said, standing. She was senile, influenced. Isabel spent years whispering in her ear, poisoning her against us. This isn't valid. It was witnessed by 2 doctors, the lawyer said calmly. And videotaped. Your grandmother was lucid, specific, and determined. Would you like to see the recording? Mateo sat. He didn't watch the recording. He was already planning. I could see it in his eyes, the lawyer's mind calculating angles, the predator assessing weakness. Carlos was less subtle. The house is the family name, he said, loud, aggressive. The family history. You can't give that to A, he stopped, looked at me. To someone who'll sell it, who'll leave, who doesn't understand what it means. I understood exactly what it meant. That was the problem. I understood that the house was 120 years of women cooking, planting, surviving men who came and went. I understood that the orange tree was planted the day I was born, that its roots were my roots, that its fruit had fed 4 generations. I understood that my brothers saw none of this. They saw property, value, leverage. Diego said nothing. He was texting someone, probably placing a bet on whether Mateo would win the appeal. The legal battle took 3 years. Mateo filed everything: challenges to competency, claims of undue influence, demands for independent medical evaluation. He used his connections, his reputation, his ability to make the system expensive. I spent $180,000 on defense. I borrowed against the house I hadn't officially received. I worked nights at a restaurant to pay the lawyers while Mateo slept in his expensive suit. I won. The court upheld the will. The house was mine, legally, finally, irrevocably. But my brothers weren't finished. Legal battles are for people who believe in the law. My brothers believed in power. Carlos renovated while the case was pending. He claimed he was maintaining the property, preventing deterioration, adding value for the family. He removed the orange tree, the tree my grandmother planted, the tree where I learned to read, the tree whose roots were older than his entire understanding of family. He called it landscaping improvement. He wanted to build a pool, a luxury feature that would maximize rental potential. I came home the day after the court decision. The tree was gone, a hole in the courtyard, raw dirt, the stump ground to sawdust. I fell to my knees. I didn't cry, I couldn't. The grief was too large, too ancient, too much like the earth itself opening where roots had been. Carlos stood in the doorway smiling. Looks better, right? More modern. The pool guys come next week. I stood. I walked to him. I looked at his face, my brother, the man who'd teased me, who'd pulled my hair, who'd called me princess while he stole my dolls, and I saw a stranger. A man who measured value in destruction. Get out, I said. It's my house too, he lied. Mateo says we all have rights. You can't just get out, or I call the police. He laughed, but he left. He always left when confronted directly. He was a coward in work boots, a destroyer who ran from the wreckage. I thought that was the worst. I was wrong. Diego had been busy. While Mateo fought in court and Carlos destroyed the courtyard, Diego had used the house, my house, still legally contested but practically accessible, as collateral. Loans. Multiple loans. From lenders who didn't ask questions, who charged interest that compounded weekly, who didn't care about legal ownership as long as someone signed. Diego signed, as family representative, as co-owner, as authorized agent. He forged documents, used copies of my grandmother's signature, created a paper trail of debt that attached to the property like barnacles. I discovered this the night after I won the court case. I went to the bank to finalize the transfer, to pay off my legal debts, to begin the restoration. The banker looked at me with pity. Miss Vasquez, there are liens on this property. Multiple liens, totaling, let me check, $430,000. I couldn't speak. The number was impossible. The house was mine, the court said so, the will was clear. The liens were filed by private lenders, the banker continued. Your brother Diego Vasquez signed as authorized representative. The documents appear to have been notarized, though we're investigating that. Until these are resolved, the property cannot be transferred to your name free and clear. I went home. To the house that was and wasn't mine. To the courtyard with its missing tree. To the kitchen where my grandmother's tamales still seemed to scent the air, ghost food, memory nutrition. And I found the locks changed. Mateo stood in the window, drinking my grandmother's wine from her crystal. Carlos sat on the new patio furniture where the tree had been, laughing at something on his phone. Diego wasn't there, probably at a casino, spending money that didn't exist. I knocked. I pounded. I screamed. Mateo opened the window, not the door, the window, like speaking to a servant. Isabel, he said, smooth, legal, reasonable. You have debts. Legal fees, liens, complications. We've formed a company, a family company, to manage these issues. The house is an asset of that company. You're welcome to live here, of course, as a tenant. We can discuss rent. Rent, I repeated. The word didn't make sense. It was a word from another language, another life, a word that didn't belong in my mouth. Reasonable rent. Mateo continued. Given your financial situation, or you can sell your interest to us. We'll give you fair market value, minus debts, of course, minus legal fees, minus the cost of Carlos's renovations. Fair market value, Carlos shouted from the patio. After we improved it, I looked at them. My brothers. The men who'd shared my childhood, who'd pulled my hair and called me names and expected me to serve them food at family dinners. The men who'd watched my mother fade, who'd never visited my grandmother in her last years, who'd appeared at the funeral in expensive clothes and left early for business. They'd locked me out of my inheritance. They'd turned my home into a company asset. They'd turned me into a tenant in the house where I was born. I walked away. That night, I slept in my car. The next night, in a shelter. The third night, Rosa, not my grandmother, but a woman from the restaurant where I worked, who'd noticed my exhaustion, my silence, my refusal to explain, offered her couch. "Stay," she said. "As long as you need." I stayed, I worked, I saved, and I planned, I disappeared. Not physically, I was still in the city, still working, still visible to anyone who looked. But I disappeared from my brother's narrative. I stopped calling lawyers. I stopped demanding access. I stopped fighting in courts they controlled with money and connections. I became invisible. Woman with 2 jobs, a small studio, no car, no profile. Someone they forgot to watch, but I watched them. Mateo, victorious, converted the house into a luxury Airbnb. Short-term rentals, bachelor parties, influencers seeking authentic historical ambience. The house that had held 4 generations of family meals became a backdrop for strangers' photos, a prop for content, a cash machine with original hardwood floors. Carlos renovated. He removed original vigas, the hand-hewn wooden beams that had supported the roof for 120 years, and replaced them with steel supports that were more modern. He tore out the original tile in the bathrooms, installed marble that didn't match the house's character, created luxury suites where my grandmother's bedroom had been. He didn't get permits. He didn't follow historical preservation codes. He did what he wanted because the house was his now, because power meant never asking permission. Diego gambled the rental income. He took loans against the company's future earnings. He created new debts, new liens, new complications that even Mateo couldn't track. The house became a financial house of cards, each card placed by a different brother, each card dependent on the others not falling. I documented everything, every party, every structural change, every code violation, every unpermitted renovation, every tax return that didn't report Airbnb income, every loan document that Diego signed with forged signatures. I didn't have money for lawyers. I had something better, time and patience. And the understanding that men who believe they've won become careless. The discovery came at a party. Not mine, Mateo's. He was getting married. To a woman 20 years younger, an influencer with 1 million followers, a wedding planned for the historical family estate that would generate content, sponsorship, validation of his narrative. He sent me an invitation, not because he wanted me there, because not inviting me would look suspicious, because his bride's followers valued family unity. Because he needed me as a prop, the reconciled sister, the happy ending to his story. I didn't attend, but I watched. From outside, from a car, from the shadows where I'd learned to live. The wedding was scheduled for Saturday in March. The house decorated. The courtyard filled with tents, the missing orange tree replaced by imported flowers that would die in the desert heat. 300 guests. Sponsors, press. I waited until Thursday. 3 days before the wedding. 3 days before Mateo would be most invested, most visible, most vulnerable. Then I moved. First, the Historical Preservation Office. I submitted my documentation, photos, records, expert assessments of the structural damage, the vigas removed without permit, the original tile destroyed, the courtyard altered. The house, designated historical landmark, had been illegally modified. The office acted quickly, they had a backlog, but my documentation was thorough, my evidence irrefutable, my timing perfect. They issued a stop work order. The wedding, they determined, was an event requiring special permits for a historical property. Permits that didn't exist. Permits that couldn't be obtained in 3 days. Second, the IRS. I submitted the Airbnb records, the income never reported, the deductions fraudulently claimed, the business expenses that were personal vacations. The rental income alone over 3 years exceeded $2 million. None reported. The audit was automatic, immediate, devastating. Third, the bank. I explained that I was the majority shareholder of the company that controlled the house, that I had acquired this position legally, through a debt payment that Mateo had never imagined anyone would make. That the loans Diego had taken, the loans that had created the company's debt, were fraudulent, unauthorized, personally guaranteed by Diego but not by the company. The bank froze the accounts. All of them. The company's, Mateo's personal, the wedding fund that was company money. Fourth, the police. I filed a report about the forged documents Diego had used, the signatures that weren't my grandmother's, the notarizations that were fraudulent, the loans taken against property that Diego didn't own. The fraud was clear, documented, provable. I didn't do this myself. I had help. Rosa, who'd given me her couch, connected me with a journalist who'd been investigating Airbnb tax fraud. The journalist connected me with a historical preservation lawyer who worked pro bono for landmark cases. The lawyer connected me with a forensic accountant who found patterns in the financial documents I'd collected. I was not alone. That was the lesson my grandmother had taught me in the kitchen under the tree in her last words. You build community, you build trust, you build the network that holds you when family fails. The wedding morning was chaos. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. The story reached me through texts, through news alerts, through the journalist's live updates. Mateo arrested at his own wedding, not for the fraud that would come later, for contempt for attempting to proceed with the event after the stop work order, for assaulting the inspector who tried to enforce it. He was handcuffed in his tuxedo, his bride live-streaming the moment, her followers watching the family unity narrative collapse in real time. Carlos, attempting to flee through the back, found the construction inspectors waiting. His renovations were deemed structurally dangerous. The house was partially condemned. He faced charges of unlicensed contracting, code violations, and endangerment. His business license, already shaky, was revoked. Diego, desperate for wedding money that no longer existed, tried to access the company safe. He was caught by security, arrested for attempted burglary, added to the growing list of charges. His gambling debts, now unpayable, made him a target for lenders who didn't use courts. I was at the house when they took Mateo away. Not inside, I still didn't have keys. But in the courtyard, standing where the orange tree had been, holding a small sapling I'd grown from a cutting saved before Carlos destroyed the original. The police let me through. I was the owner, after all. The legal owner, the majority shareholder, the woman with the court documents and the paid debt and the key that was finally mine. I didn't watch them take my brothers away. I planted the tree. I dug the hole, I placed the roots, I covered them with soil. I watered it with a can my grandmother had used that I'd rescued from the garage where Carlos had stored it with junk. When I finished, I stood. The house was mine. The locks were mine to change. The kitchen was mine to cook in. The courtyard was mine to fill with children reading, with women cooking, with community built from the wreckage of family betrayal. But it was also empty. The victory was silent. There was no one to celebrate with, no one to share the moment, no one who understood what it cost to stand in a courtyard with a tree in your hands and brothers in handcuffs. I didn't visit them in prison. I didn't send letters. I didn't offer forgiveness. Mateo served 8 months. Lost his law license. His marriage lasted 6 weeks. The influencer, discovering that family estate was a condemned property with legal liens, found a new narrative. Mateo now works as a paralegal, unlicensed, unrespected, drafting documents for people who don't know his fall. Carlos lost his contracting business. Moved to another state, builds concrete patios, houses without history, structures that won't outlast him. He sends me letters, not apologies, just requests for money, for help, for family. I don't open them. Diego was in prison longest, 2 years for fraud plus parole. He lives in a halfway house now, works at a gas station, attends Gamblers Anonymous. He wrote me once a real letter, not asking for money, just, "I'm sorry, I know that doesn't matter, but I'm sorry." I didn't respond. I don't know if I ever will. The house is restored. Original vigas, sourced from a historical demolition in another state. Original tile, recreated by artisans who studied the fragments Carlos left behind. The orange tree grows small, young, but alive, bearing fruit in season, providing shade for the children who come. I opened the house to the community. Cooking classes on Saturdays, my grandmother's recipes, the tamales she taught me, the mole that took 3 days. Reading circles on Sundays under the tree in her memory, for anyone who wants to learn. Workshops for young people interested in restoration, in history, in the trades that Carlos devalued. A girl came last week. 10 years old, new to the neighborhood. She asked if she could see the orange tree. My grandma says it's the oldest in the barrio. I let her in. I showed her the house. I told her about Rosa. She came back, with friends, with questions. With the hunger to learn that my brothers never had, that they replaced with acquisition and destruction. I don't have children. I don't have a partner. I have this house, this tree, this community. I have the memory of my grandmother's hands in mine, teaching me to fold tamales, to read slowly, to understand that inheritance is not possession but responsibility. Sometimes at night I check the locks 3 times. And then I remember I changed them. I hold the key. The house is mine, not because I won a war, but because I refused to become the person my brothers were. I refused to turn property into power. I refused to make the house a weapon. I made it a door, for everyone, including myself. I'm Isabel. I'm 40 years old. I have 3 brothers who are strangers, a house that is home, and an orange tree that is older than my pain and will outlast my name. See you in the next story.